It is great that finally this is happening. I have to say it was just a little sort of idea, a kind of a follow-up on the event that we had in the end of the past year in this summit that finally took place online. It was organized by the REMA, and we, as the AEC, we collaborated with that in a few sessions of that event. There was this feeling that in the frame of those larger events, there's normally not enough time to get into details. The speakers have to speak like very short time. They have to say all their ideas. Then there is time for discussion, but it's also very limited time for that. And I mean, the solution just came up to us like, if we're doing so many of these things online, we could maybe just schedule meetings in which we can focus on one topic or focus on one give the space to one person to actually deal in more depth, with any of the topics that are interesting to us. The topic of today was Peter's contribution to the panel in that summit about the culturally informed performance of music. An idea that, well, Peter will speak about it in a minute, but an idea that is, let's say, a way to transcend the label that we have been using and we still use of historically informed performance. Peter will explain why this idea. I have also, as Peter knows, some objections or some questions or some difficult or maybe easy questions to ask to him, and then everyone can also ask anything about this topic, and hopefully this will engender more discussion around the general idea. So we're not going to really present ourselves so much because we want to keep it. Also, this was one of the ideas for this, that we keep it informal, just open, informal, and accessible for teachers, for students, people from different generations to participate. So I'm going to take it a bit more on the personal side. I met Peter in The Hague, of course, when I went there to study. Peter, it's almost like 15 years ago already. Yeah, so
come on.
Peter was teaching Baroque aesthetics and analysis and rhetoric and performance practice. It was a subject with a very long name. It was a central subject for the Bachelor of Early Music at that moment. And I was very lucky because I caught the last year that Peter was teaching that subject in The Hague. That was really the last year. After that, the subject changed. Then we have a new program now, and this it's a different story. But I was lucky enough to catch that last year. Then I remember from that time the excitement. I think let's see if I'm not wrong. It was Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening that Peter was teaching this subject, a very long class, also 2 hours or sometimes 3 hours class. And the amount of information was astounding. It was sheer amount of information. The bibliography for the class was 17 pages, 300 items of bibliography. I still look up to that bibliography today, even though there has been like 15 years of more books published and many interesting things. But not only information, there was also a very strong philosophical basis for which I am very grateful. And let's say that there was this idea of thinking about the musical performance or the musical performance of early music in a critical way, very seriously, and like not making any sort of like shortcuts, to really getting into all the problems that were there. Then, in a way, for me, it is really a pleasure today to be able to contribute a little bit, being part of that tradition, in the sense that taking seriously these new ideas that are proposed by Peter, the thing that you have to do when you take something seriously is actually to try to criticize it, to try to put it upside down and see all the things that you agree, don't agree, classify it, open it, analyze it, etc. And that's what I intended to do today a little bit. So I don't assume that everyone is familiar with the concept of culturally informed performance. So maybe, Peter, you want to say something about that? I have also your text, so if you want, it is also possible.
Yeah.
And but yeah.
In my presentation a few months ago, the element of changing something like historically informed performance practice to culturally informed performance practices was only one of the elements of that statement that I made. And actually, as far as I'm concerned, not the most important one. The most important one was towards the end of the statement, that what we call historically informed performance practice, or what we could call culturally informed performance practice, and I will talk about it, Isaac, don't worry, that this is actually something that does not seem to be the only domain, the only field anymore of early music musicians, how we define early music. But I think when I say that in this context, that everybody has an image of what I mean with early music musicians, and that actually, and when you come to think of it, if you really criticize the very concept of having this activity of culturally informed performance or historically informed performance, that it can never be a goal-oriented attitude or approach, but that it is a process-oriented attitude or approach. Since there are new insights, there are new ideas, new interpretations, we rewrite history, and let's face it, history is not the past, it's our narrative about the past. We keep rewriting that. We also evolve personally, and we come in different performance situations, and all that this leads to a situation where we cannot say, okay, when a musician does that and that and that and that, this is historically informed performance practice, or this is culturally informed performance practice. And I would even take it as far to say that even the use of what we call historical instruments or period instruments, for me, is not a necessity anymore to define an approach to the performance of a specific piece of music as historically or culturally informed. In reality, I encounter much more nowadays. I encounter much more classically trained musicians who seem to be much more curious about the origin of the piece and the first performance and the first circumstance in which it was originally performed than sometimes in early music departments. And as it occurs to me, there is a very strange evolution going on, that in many cases, young students or starting students, beginning students in conservatories who play early music instruments are mostly attracted to the very thing by a performance or a CD recording that they have heard. So basically by the music itself and by the tool with which it was then performed when they heard it. And they want to do that too. And then they come in an early music department and they have to get past this enormous course of historically informed performance practice or culturally informed performance practice, which as a sort of weight that they have to carry. You don't have to do it for your diploma. I mean, whereas in many other cases, I encounter classically trained musicians who have been playing Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, whatever, Brahms even nowadays, and who wonder, what do we actually know about the original performance conditions of this music? And who keep playing on their modern instruments because they don't have the old instrument, but who just manage to go very close to the spirit of using that information and incorporating that in their personal artistic version of their performance. And I wonder which of the two examples is closer to the spirit of historically or culturally informed performance practice. So Isaac, if you would allow me, I know that you have some comments on my use of the name cultural, and we can definitely talk about that. We have to do that. But I would also like to talk about this other element. My idea would be, my proposal, and this is also what I'm trying to achieve in the schools where I teach, is to take culturally informed performance practice out of the music of the early music department. I mean, they will have it as well, but introduce it into the entire conservatory. And because this is a mentality that can lead to many, or approach that can lead to many different artistic results. And then what we could preserve, of course, in an early music department is the tool with which you do it. I mean, I can imagine, I have never had that experience myself, but if you switch between a Baroque oboe and a modern oboe and a Baroque oboe, for example, that it takes you some time to get used with that very tool, and that you need a few years to be able to do that and to develop that, and that this would be rather, for me, the future sense of an early music department, rather than the department where you get into contact with all these philosophical concepts, because you should already have been in contact with that in the classical department. And this is my basic position on that. So up to you, Isaac, what you want to discuss first, but I would definitely like, if it's possible, to discuss both elements. I don't hear you.
1 second. No, absolutely. I was thinking that you can start with whatever part you would like to, and we can maybe take turns of I don't know, 5-10 minutes, so that it's not too long. Then if I have something that I could bring into that, and otherwise that people can start asking questions right from the beginning, so we keep the discussion going and the dialogue lively. So just get into it.
There's one little remark before you. I really give the floor to anybody else. I did explain you what I meant with this more process-oriented than goal-oriented, but I did not explain why I introduced that word, culturally informed performance practices.
Yeah.
A consequence of many books I read that are already not very new, actually, but especially Susan McClary's book, Conventional Wisdom, where she talks hardly about, there is sound going on somewhere in the background. I hear a dog barking. Anyhow, what she talks about an approach to music. Well, actually, what she explains is that the whole context in which music is originated and was first produced, that all these elements are contingent to the meaning of a piece, at least as it was originally conceived or originated. And this is what I would call culture in a very innocent way. I've taken actually the basic definition from the Cambridge English Dictionary, which says that culture is the way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. And it was not more philosophical than that. You pointed me to Gustavo Bueno's writings, El mito de la cultura, and we can definitely talk about that. But my goal was to use a term that is not just focused on the fact that it's old and that there are historical data that are important, but that there is a whole cultural context, if you allow me the word for time being, in which a work exists, and that it's the understanding of this full cultural context that gives deeper insights into the music. And sometimes these are extremely extra musical elements that that if you know them, that gives you a specific perspective on that piece of music. And by the way, let me make that clear, that still allows you afterwards to do whatever you want. So it's not because you know that you have to do it accordingly. This is not what I mean, but that the insight that you gather can be extremely revealing and can also take away any doubts or lead you into a specific way of thinking. And this is what I mean with the cultural context. And since this approach is applicable to all music that I would call remote, that means music that is not our own environment, meaning music remote in time, music remote in space, because basically I would absolutely use the same approach if I would ever be interested to perform, let's say, contemporary Korean music, which is not my culture. So I would have to dive into that culture, and my approach would be basically exactly the same, with the only difference that I can talk to people and that the music we normally play is music written by dead white man. That's the only main difference. But okay, I will stop talking now, because otherwise the hour and a half will be over it. So now it's up to you.
Yeah, I wanted to start not so much with the cultural part or the new musicology part that we will have a time to discuss, and for sure at the end the connection between what is all that information and the performance itself that you already talked about it in a way. So these are topics that we can discuss. I just wanted to go back for a second on why not historical. Yeah, the thing is that in your text you were saying historical is already like it's something self-evident, it's redundant because we always deal with historical music. Okay, then a couple of things that I drafted a couple of notes here. Yeah, early music represented for musical performance the equivalent to the historical turn to humanities, in the sense that we can have now the awareness of the historicity in music. So that's something that is a double criticism. It's a criticism of the idea of progress in the arts, and it is a criticism of the perception of musical works as timeless essences. So the value of that, you seem to include it in the cultural idea, or let's say that your cultural idea includes history, or that history is included in culture. So just I wanted to point that you also talk about three main questions of cultural informed performance. And if I might go back to them, there was one question, it was the main questions that cultural informed performance seeks to answer. One was, what could the oral image have been that the composer had in mind? The second is, what are the stylistic and cultural conventions that pertained at the moment of the work's creation, and what was the original social function of that composition? And the third, what was the role of the performers who first performed it? What kind of an amount of personal input would have been expected, or at least accepted from them? And I see here that everything is about history also. Yeah, what could have been the oral image? So in the past, cultural conventions that pertain at the moment of the work, the original social function, who first performed it, yeah, what would have been expected, what would have been accepted. So in a way that is this maybe that we are flying or fleeing away from the word historical,
Yes.
because it has some bad connotations that you mentioned already, this kind of dry museum stuff?
Yes, I think for me it's mainly that, Isaac, and
Yeah.
not more. Also, what you really mentioned is this very important. Well, listen, it goes in two directions. I feel very attracted to an approach to music that can be used only for other types of music. So by calling it culturally informed, I sort of include myself in a community of people who are dealing with very, very different types of music, and not just with old music. Firstly. The second important element for me is indeed that concept of history that even inadvertently can lead to that idea of progress, and we come from one situation and we evolve into another situation. By calling it cultural, you don't have this, well, in my mind it's a vertical axis from the beginning to now, but some people see that from left to right or from left. I see it from down to up, but you really allocate a specific situation in its own right without any necessary reference to any other period or any other layer above or under. But it's not more than that. It is evident, Isaac, that applying culturally performed performance practice to old music means historical informed performance practice. Of course, this is very, very true. So, and that's why I don't want to put too much emphasis on this whole issue. It's
Yeah.
for me, it's more attractive, and it makes me also it underlines the fact that we can use this approach for many different types of music, and it is not typical for early music.
Okay.
No?
Okay. Even if I can just go like for one more minute about the idea of history, there is one thing that you mentioned, the history about the present reconstruction of the past. And once that we don't have this, let's say, if we are not afraid of history anymore, then maybe we can help to reconstruct this idea of history in such a way that is not, that does not cause that prevention from it. Yeah, because I see a little bit this sort of prevention. So history as a scientific study of the past is already criticized, of course, because history is made in the present. But for me, the question here is that this is typically understood epistemologically. So I mean, history is made in the present. People mean normally that history is made with the prejudices of the present. History is made with the prejudices of the present, with our way of thinking at this point. And I would try to go into understanding this idea of the present materially. So the past itself does not exist. It's a metaphysical idea. It is not there. It is not there. So the past somehow must be found in the present, but not necessarily in this epistemological question on these prejudices of the present. The present itself is not a homogeneous whole, like the present versus the past. Yeah. It's in itself, it has multiple layers. It has multiple layers. Some of them tell us things about the past, and these things are materially there. The remains, the relics, the extant surviving items that show traces of human activity. Yeah, monuments, documents. Yeah, for us, the instruments, the scores, the whatever kind of documentation that we can find from the past. But this is, let's say, the material aspect. Then we have the stories in the sense of tales that we tell about those things. Somehow we have to explain those remains by imagining people doing things. So that reconstruction, we imagine people doing things in the past that can explain that thing. So the positivity or the objectivity of this could be simply if your explanation takes, if your story, your tale takes in account all these elements and can explain them successfully, that's a successful way of doing history. If you have to close your eye, let's say your eyes to some of the materials, it's probably your explanation of history is not completely sound. You have to cherry pick some of the elements, but still we're not connecting this with performance, because, as you said, that's a different story.
Yeah, and of course, what you just said is very important, but unfortunately, that's the only criterion. Indeed, if you have to close your eyes for a few elements that don't fit into your story, your story is probably wrong. But on the other hand, if you look at our own environment, and I just don't want to use the word culture in this context, there are so many things that do not fit together. So it is also quite imaginable that things did not always fit together. And actually, I am not fundamentally interested in that. For me, personally, I am absolutely aware of the fact that I'm making up stories, stories based on reference and based on indication. And I'm absolutely happy to live in the 21st century and to be doing this, to have the opportunity to make up my stories. But I would go even further. It is our damn duty to make up these stories. And as soon as stories get reality, have a real character, and this is the case in early music life today, I find. We have these schools with people who define this is truth. Perhaps the word is not used, but it is not questioned anymore. And I find that a little bit problematic.
Good. So if you agree, we might get into let's say a bit more dangerous topic, and when we get into the new musicology, the ideas of new musicology, then maybe we can have a little bit more maybe it can become a little bit more heated discussion. Yeah, once we are into that. I assume that most people are familiar with the idea of new musicology, but in any case, yeah, it's from the 80s. There's this reaction against positivist musicology, and there is a lot of focus on cultural studies, criticism, hermeneutics. It's in a way, if we were saying previously we were mentioning the historical turn, this would be more the sociological turn, if we want to put it that way. And there is a lot of influence of post-structuralism, deconstructionism, and in general this thing that is called postmodernism. That is not a very good term, because it is very imprecise, but anyhow, just for us to get to understand ourselves a little bit. So I have three criticisms to put into the way of this, of taking this, of choosing these people as companions for our travel, choosing the new musicology as companions. One of them is that part of what they say is a straw man fallacy, in the sense that there is this assumption that previous study of music completely removed music completely from social or political meaning, and that is only from new musicology that you have this kind of study. I hear, and only for this time, I have to side a little bit with Charles Rosen when he was saying that maybe Hanslick was doing that kind of thing, but that's it basically in the history of musicology. It's sort of like, hey, music is cultural, music is social. Is like, okay, we knew that. Everyone knew that. It's not that we didn't know that. It's true that some schools of analysis have gone into a very kind of essentialistic, idealistic, idealist point of view, but I find it a little bit a straw man. The other one is connected, is this Adanism, that all these things are done for the first time in the 80s. Yeah, this is connected to that. And the other one is a little bit this nihilism that comes from this. Yeah, by focusing primarily on the social significance of music or of any art or of any activity, this actually erases material differences between music. Let's say, if you have, for example, the social significance of a sacred piece is the religious rite. But then
social functions and
one of the social functions. By focusing on that, it's the same to have an polychoral mass by some 17th century composer, or to have just some sort, this kind of lysologism that is done when you compare across cultures, and that's the difficulty of this. Yeah, and we can assume that from criticism, but we cannot assume that as musicians. As practical musicians.
The only question is, how do you define culture? For me, for example, already I make a distance between Mass and Vespers. And that Vespers is a different social context than a Mass. And in that sense, you can make it as big as...
No, but I mean more about comparing music from different cultures, because when you go across cultures, you can still have the social significance. Yeah, as a constant. Yeah, and then there's no difference between music from one culture, the music of another culture, because the material aspect of that culture, what I mean, how this music is put together, is not taken in account, because the important thing is what is the discourse behind that, the power struggle, all these sort of things that are so important and so central for new musicology. That erases for me effectively the material, the musical differences in music. Yeah, why we consider why do we regard highly some forms of art? Yeah, and that's if the criteria is only the social significance, that finally erases the differences.
And what would you propose instead then? Because I find it, for example, important to realize, but I mean, you can use whatever words you want or whatever terms you want as soon as you know what different... the problem with using terms is that it always leads to a specific expectance. If you call Bach's or German church music from the early 18th century, if you call this, apart from the Passions, you call these cantatas, for example, then you make an association with a related genre that has nothing to do with that, except for some superficial parallels in their construction. To know that this was called Kirchenmusik or Kirchenstück changes expectations in your head. But my point is, Isaac, as soon as you know that it was called Kirchenmusik or Kirchenstück, I don't care anymore whether you call it cantata or song, It doesn't matter anymore. I think that the positive thing, or the enriching thing of changing term, I'm afraid now, in this conversation, that by using culturally performed performance practice as a term, I have made a sort of new stream, a new direction, a new motto. At all, it's exactly against that very image. But of course, I admit the act of introducing a new term makes people believe that, oh, we have something new now, we have a new approach. the approach is basically the same thing. And I don't care about names at all. As long as you know what the danger is of specific terms and how it could really um, focus your mind too narrowly on one aspect.
Mhm.
And what you just did is to do that with my newly introduced term, and righteously so. You're right to do it, because the danger is as important there than in the other term.
Yeah, the danger stay. But now I was going more in the direction of when you say that you can apply this to other worlds. You can go to I don't know, Korean music and or some other sort of, yeah, because you have the, once you use the cultural context, you can transfer to this other world and start doing that kind of work, as long as you take all this baggage, this cultural baggage with yeah.
This is not exactly what I said. I
Yeah.
said the approach would be the same, that I would like to know
Mhm.
what notes and notated music. I have never been in contact with
Mhm.
Korean traditional
Mhm.
music, so just an example. But as soon as I am confronted with notation, for example, I want to only take one, and I want to know what this notation in this context meant, and it will probably be different than what notation in another context means.
Mhm.
And this is a cultural approach that you just go. There might be even association between the specific types of letters or characters in the language and the associations that they evoke in relation to specific sounds, which you can only find out if you're really deep in what I call Korean culture.
Mhm.
I find it, and really to be very, very, very strict, I find it quite difficult to say that you want to specialize or you want to focus as a musician on German music of the first half of the 18th century. Why? Now that we are dealing with terms, let's be careful with German as well. But okay, apart from that, that you focus on music from that period, and that you wouldn't speak a little bit of German, for example.
Mhm.
This is for me a lack of interest in cultural context. And I'm absolutely sure that musicians can make music without knowing any word of German, but I also know that knowing a little bit of German will help you a little bit with insights on that music. And this is all what I call cultural context.
Yeah. Then exactly coming to that, because one is the example that you put before about the Korean contemporary Korean music, and another example is this one 18th century German sacred music or something like that. I think that when we are using this idea of culture, what's happening is that we take this. Of course, you took the modern definition, the older definition. You have this one from Taylor about the complex whole of all this way of living and way of doing things, and the complex whole. And this thing of the complex whole erases the differences. Effectively, erases differences in the sense that if we can do something with Korean music, is because there is some sort of connection before. If we can do something with 18th century music, in German 18th century music, it's because if we have some sort of connection with that. If we lose that connection, there's no cultural study that will bring that back again. So we can do early music because we had classical music in between. That's the only possibility. Because even the word music itself is not something that you can take to Korean music. When you say Korean music, it's only because we have music, and you make an analogy. In this way of using music is analogous. It's not a direct thing, because who knows if in some remote culture somewhere in the world they have a word for music that actually matches with the significance that we put to music, or music is actually something that is a word that is used with religion or something like that. The very word music didn't mean the same during our whole history, coming from the musicae of the Greeks. This idea, this Latin musica, which was first only the theoretical part, etc. All these sort of ideas. So we cannot really use. That's my main problem. We tend to take this idea of culture to sort of like protect ourselves when we get into something else that is really other. Because let's face it, this music of the 18th century is not the same other. It's not the same other, because there is a living tradition, even though the performances are completely different, but we can come from the tradition. We still call music the same thing, not exactly the same thing, yeah, because already 18th century German music, they would say singen for the chorale and musizieren only when it is the cantata itself, yeah, not musizieren if you're just singing the chorale.
Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. So that would be already a different use of the word music. Yeah. So this is a little bit the question for me, that the usage of that word, while it seems to protect the topic itself that we're studying, is actually protecting ourselves and creating separated spheres. Like they can be, yeah, and then that's very much from anthropology. So they were going to study a tribe and in the middle of Africa, and they start saying things like, what is the medicine of this tribe? What is the mathematics of this culture? What is the, yeah, but then it's just like,
But of course, Isaac, and it's even more fundamental than that. I think every contact we have with let's keep talking about music and make it to art as a whole. Just music. When we are confronted with a piece of music, the fact that we are able to contemplate that in whatever direction, the reason for that is that there is something common between us and that piece of music, or at least that we assume that what we see is that very thing that we think we have in common. And second important element, ultimately as musicians, we have to do something with that piece. I mean, it is not going to sound automatically. It is going to need your performance to come to life. And so ultimately the question is the same for every musician. What can I do with this piece of music? The main difference is, and what I would emphasize with this term cultural informed performance practice, and does not go any further than that, is that instead of having the level of confrontation with the piece of music and then what do you do with it, there's also a level underneath. What does it mean? What could it mean in its own cultural context where it originated? But then still, having contemplated this, your action remains the same. What will I do with it? So there is always, for me, these triple elements: the basic confrontation, which is based on recognition, the action of performing it, which is your artistry, your task as a performer, whether you call that perform, interpret, represent, whatever you call it, it's going to be your personal idea, and your investigation to what it could perhaps have meant in a context that was closer to the origin of that piece of music. And I don't see any danger of separating or missing things as long as you're conscious of these three poles. I don't know if that image adds something to the discussion.
Yeah, very much. Then what I would try to go to at this point is taking what you were saying of these three levels, or this separation between, because that we completely agree in the sense of what you do with that is something completely different. It's something completely different. Yeah. So then we could maybe for that actually use the criticism that we had from Peter Kivey of the historically informed performance term, yeah, because as probably as people know here, that there was that term is actually itself is a new term, because the term before that there was a lot of discussion with the whole authenticity debate in the 80s and 90s, and what I feel is that it's one more level of of becoming afraid of something and then using something else in the way. Yeah, so people became afraid of the usage of authenticity, authentic performance, and all of that because of all the criticism in the 80s and the 90s. Then historically informed performance practice came, but Peter Kivey was saying, yeah, if historically informed performance has nothing to do with performance, then okay, then it has nothing to do with performance. Yeah, you cannot judge a performance and say how historically informed it is or not. Yeah, but if it has something to do with performance, then he was saying it's something very similar to authenticity still. Yeah, so his criticism still remains, and then we could maybe translate it to now. I would say I'm not actually my idea is not so much to criticize your term, but taking it to actually criticize also the idea of historically informed performance. Yeah, so that historically informed performance itself is also something impossible. It's an impossibility, because you can have, as you said, all the information that you want, all the tales and stories, all the history that you want about something, and then performing is a completely different thing. Yeah, performing cannot be historical. There cannot be historical performances. Yeah, still, yeah, and I know you don't care so much about the words, but many of our departments are called historical performance, or many of our subjects are called historical performance. I don't think it's a good idea to put names into things when they are impossible things. They are something that are completely ideal, or they belong to the metaphysics world or something like that, because this actually alienates people. Actually, it's alienating people, and this is something that is a constant in the story of naming subjects and in the story of naming things. For example, when I studied when I was 10, when I was studying in the conservatory, we had a subject that was solfeo, simply. And that's an action. That's something that you can learn and you can practice. A few years later, it was changed to musical language, lenguaje musical. It was changed into something that is in itself a metaphor, and it's almost metaphysical already, because is that do you mean that you translate something by music, etc.? Yeah, all these sort of things. Yeah, still declamation or drama, dramatic art. Yeah, other subjects in other fields of the performing arts are still the same. So in a way, my criticism of that topic is to actually put a break to this. Yeah, and actually start going back in the sense of stop fleeing away from the terms that have been criticized by still inventing another one and going even further into this complication. So I want actually to render it more simple. Yeah, and then all the objections are going actually in that way. So we agree that something cannot be a performance cannot be informed. A performance cannot be informed. Performance can be high or low, fast, slow, can be many things, but the performance itself cannot be historical, cannot be, or it is always historical, because it will be part of some operations that then later will be called history. Yeah, like what we call a historical recording.
The word practice is added. It's not historical performance. So it's performance practice. So it's a bit more complicated than that, but I agree.
Yeah,
historical, of course. Well, a performance can be historical, but in quite a different way.
Exactly, a performance that happened. I don't know. Bach's Matthäus Passion performed by Mendelssohn is a historical performance of Bach, in the sense that it made history, and we study it in a history class. Yeah, in music history class. But a performance can also not be informed culturally. The performance itself, yeah, but and the performance practice that wouldn't merit a discussion, because probably also the practice itself cannot be informed. But we will get into more troubles like this. If the idea is, because I really see your idea and I actually sympathize with that we take these ways of working and we extend them to the classical world, to the modern department. Yeah, that
and there you also have two words that need to be discussed.
Exactly. Yeah, modern in what terms, and classical, of course, in what terms. But if the idea is to extend that, yeah, then let's talk about that. Actually, yeah, let's talk about that. So, what is the main questions that we ask from the music? What are the main? Are they also, as you were saying, very interested in all those things? I would be really. I mean, is that all that we have to do? Is that all that we have to do to convince the whole musical establishment, in the sense of the conservatoire institution, yeah, to partake on our methods? Is that the goal?
I don't think that I completely understand your question.
I mean, the goal of deriving a new methodology, or even if it's just a new name for a methodology that already exists, yeah. If we discarded already this part of being afraid of the terms because we have criticism in the past, etc., we have that, we covered that, yeah. But do we have also the goal that the conservatory as a whole has to partake of methods that we typically call historically informed performance practice, and that now we are going to call culturally informed performance practice? Is that maybe, let's put it on a bit humoristic tone, is that the imperialism of the early music department towards the...
No, but it cannot be imperialism, first of all, if you first of all change the term. That makes you so typical. So there can be suspicion of imperialism. But what I really think, and this is a mentality that I find important for purely my ideas on society, even so beyond the importance of music, is that I find it logic if you're confronted with something you seem to be interested in because you engage that contact with that piece of art, in caso here a piece of music, that it becomes very, very fashionable nowadays in more than one circle to say, okay, I'm completely a virgin in that field. In German, they have a very beautiful word for that, Blauäugigkeit. It means sort of
Blue.
so I have to do this stage direction of this opera. I have never heard such music before, and it becomes almost a compliment to you. It's almost an asset, the fact that you are a virgin, and so you have this music come over you, and then your creative mind creates all kinds of things. So that means artistic creativity, undamaged by knowledge or by interest even. This is a mentality that I really oppose. What I do not oppose is that a very well-informed person says, okay, and I'm going to do something very different now. I find that still very different from somebody who says, I don't know, nothing. And I just, it oozes out of me. But of course, I'm not a judge in saying that is bad and that it's good, but I find it a real problem for our ability to empathize with other ways of being. And I think that this ties with my deeper ideas on society, and even if you want political ideas. I think it is very, very important for us as human beings, as part of this civilization, whatever you define now as civilization, because we can have a discussion about that too, that we are able to empathize with other ways of being, and that things that seem to be the same as on first sight can mean very, very different things, and can also work very well in a very different way. And I think that this is for me the reason. I even believe that what we now call early music, in this sense, with historically informed performance or a performance practice or culturally, whatever you name it, is an absolute good medicine for a society that is starting to miss that capacity to empathize.
I'm sorry if I may interrupt you, but there is some questions in the chat. Laura Mingo wanted to ask something.
Yeah,
maybe you
I was I was going to get into that right now. Yeah, there was from the last 4 or 5 minutes there appeared a couple of questions. I think that so far maybe people were just a little bit afraid to get into it. I just wanted to say that these were my main objections, and I hope that they were strong enough, and so that it can be serious, but at the same time that they were not too strong to actually get this out of the informal.
And somehow you're very right. I will close this. Sometimes somehow you're very, very right, Isaac. For example, I can live very well for probably the same reasons that you point at me. I can live very well with the term early music. I don't discuss that because everybody knows what about. So it's not consistent that I would replace the term hip by CIP on one hand, and then still go on with the term of early music. So I've made your point. It's
good. So we have a question from Laura Mingo, and then we have another Laura. Let's start from the first. Laura would be interested to know what the term could, in my opinion, coherently replace the current widespread name historically informed performance in a way that summarizes its content for a non-specialist audience. I think here the key is this idea of non-specialist audience. I actually had, for a while, had trouble explaining to my non-specialist, so non-musician friends what I was doing when I was dealing with early music. And I remember once, and it was like, in this case, was a highly educated guy, of course, more in sciences, and I think he's still working on cartography at this time. And he was asking to me, "What are you doing with all this thing of what is this early music and all these old instruments thing?" I was telling him, when we, for example, perform something by Mozart, and I just used Mozart because I was sure that he knew the name. We try to know, for example, what was the piano that Mozart used. We try to know, for example, what was the places where they performed, the context where they performed, what was the I don't know, now we can call it the tuning, the temperament. We can say all these specialistic terms, yeah. But I was trying to explain all this to a non-specialist, to all these elements, practical and also a little bit contextual, and to perform that piece. And then he answered to me, and I think that's the key. Isn't that what all musicians should be doing?
Of course, that's why I want to introduce my hip idea to the entire.
Exactly. And that is where we come together, actually. Yeah. So actually, we shouldn't need historically informed performance. The thing should be that if you study in the conservatory, you should get all the culturally or historical information that you need to understand what's going on. So in a way, here rescuing a humanistic part for music.
Absolutely.
A humanistic part for music. Yeah. So that would be the thing. I wouldn't say that then we need a term for it. It's just the thing that people normally do in the conservatory. Otherwise, why do you need a special institution for it? Then Laura is asking, aren't historical performance and historically informed performance two different things? One can be informed and make choices out of it. I think you were talking about that, Peter, but if you want to say something else, when you say historical performance, historically informed performance, or historically informed performance practice, what do you want to say about it?
Well, practice really, you could even call it, instead of practice, process, the way of thinking that deals with these matters. Historical performance is indeed limited to if you can document it. Specific Rachmaninoff playing his second or third piano concerto, for example, is an historical performance. Historical performance practice would then be your own performance that is fed and inspired, or at least aware of these original contexts. And that makes a difference. But again, we have to focus on names and explain, and we are going to run into barriers. That's your point, Isaac.
There was this proposal by Sophia Aretz. Maybe she can open her mic and actually talk about it.
Sophia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I read The Pathetic Musician by Bruce Haynes and Geoffrey Burgess. I don't know how it's, yeah, and the end of early music, and there it's like a vital place of rhetoric music. And yeah, I just wanted to ask you.
But again, you're going to have problems if you use the word rhetoric or eloquent music to define a specific kind of music, because when does that stop and when does something else then start? I mean, eloquence was already very, very important before it was even applied to some degree to music. And it continued to be very important at the moment that it was not primarily the concern of music anymore. So it's going to be, any term we're going to use is going to be difficult. In that sense, I must say I feel much more for the idea of Isaac. Once this mentality, this information is given to anybody who plays music from the past, it can just be called historical documentation, because it's a very general term where you can be about many, many different things.
And actually, just the music history class should become something like this, instead of the life of works of such and such, becomes a history of musical practices, a history of musical practices, including temperaments and all the topics that we assume as performance practice. Yes,
And
yeah.
sometimes it will be important to refer to the life of that composer, because it will enable you to understand a specific technique that this man or this woman, there are few female composers, using at a specific place at a specific moment.
And now I would like to call forward Michael Melza, because he has a very interesting thought that he put on the chat, but maybe he can speak for himself.
Yeah, I try, because I would like to comment that this discussion on the Zoom is not very easy. Not everything is really considerable, especially Isaac, when you forget to put on to unmute, no, to mute yourself, and all kinds of other disconnections and problems. So it's difficult to follow whatever you say in a kind of meeting like that. That's why I would try not to deal with the past and try to make a Zoom like that, a Zoom meeting like that, to make it to deal especially with the present. So what do we gain from these ideas? What the general society, not only professionals, not scholars, not musicians, what does society can gain from these ideas, from this discussion about historically versus cultural versus whatever we would like. That's all. It's a suggestion. It's not a critique.
It's true. I think that of course, everything deserves to be discussed, but I agree with you, Michael. This is our first task, I think, with this way of dealing with this music from the past, because that's what we are talking about. Are there specific ways of dealing with that have a social value, that really add something to society? And there I would like to come, because I think I have thought a long time about these things, because it questions yourself as an artist, actually, and also it questions your assumptions that seem to be there without you not realizing that if you're not careful. And I must admit that my basic assumption is a vision on society that is not shared by everyone. So you already have taken a direction before you even decide to discuss the possible value of hip, let's call it hip now. And my vision on society is a society that is empathetic, that is not based on the survival of the fittest, although this is a very fundamental human characteristic, but our capacity to empathize is also a very important one, and to confront ourselves with things that are slightly different than the things with which we are confronted in our everyday life. For me, there is no other reason to listen to a Mozart symphony, to just take the example of that Isaac mentioned, or to go to an exposition on Caravaggio, except for the fact that this specific art gives me something, whether I know something about it or not, but gives me something that I can't get in that form with another object or with another confrontation. And knowing more about that object really leads me to a greater capacity to empathize with otherness, and not just respect otherness, but embrace it and see it as an enrichment of myself. In other words, the man who appears in front of you with funny clothes because you don't know the clothes, perhaps if you understand where these clothes come from and why that tradition in which these clothes is worn originated, you can say, hey, why shouldn't I do that then? Because that seems interesting. It's perhaps a little bit exaggerated what I'm saying, but now I'm unveiling the bottom of my heart, actually. And this is not something I want to discuss with you, in the sense that I have this basic assumption. And I also inform my students that this is my basic assumption, and that with my lessons, for example, they are going to have also my vision on the world. And I cannot avoid that, so I can as well be honest about it. Is that an answer to your question, Michael?
Well, yes, very much. I thank you for making us know more about your inner thoughts, and not only professional outside
Yes.
ideas. Yes, what I think I would just would dare to say, since I believe I am the only one of the whole group right now who played in the last 25 years at least 30 pieces of Korean music
That's fantastic.
written for a modern flute, then that's why I believe I'm very unique. That's why I dare to say that I believe that not only we should look at the other, at, at the different culture, but we should look for our culture. What can we gain from these other cultures, or in time and in space, as you said? And I believe this is the real subject that all of us should really ask. And especially in the last year of the COVID-19, the whole business of what does it do to our society, and what is the goal of making music in this time. It must change somehow our music making and our way of believing in the power of music to change the world.
Yeah, it's a very fundamental thought, and here we arrive at something. Isaac, you stop us whenever you think that this is going too far, but we arrive at something that connected with what said before is one of my biggest problems now. This is the commercialization of everything in this world, including the musical scene, and the lobbying you need to do to be able to have a chance with your ensemble, and that kind of things, which is for me driving us to an, or leading us to a type of world that I don't like anymore. And it's also always going to be a part of that. I mean, I'm not naive as well. I mean, if you read Monteverdi's letters, for example, you see that he struggled too with these kind of elements. But I believe very strongly in the German idea of Bildung. There is a fantastic presentation on the idea of Bildung in German by Peter Bieri at the University of Bern. It's on the internet. You can wie wäre es gebildet zu sein? His presentation is called. And it's a fantastic plea for this concept of Bildung, which really entails curiosity, interest for different things, and also with the goal to enrich yourself, and by that your environment. Yeah, and for me it's that it's sheer. I mean, you can only see my face now when I say the following thing. For me, it's sheer hunger. People who know the rest of my body know that this is not just mental, but also physical. But for me, it's pure hunger, and I want to savor everything and be able to approach things, and to get all the shades of gray in between our blacks and whites that we are using so often. Hence also my curiosity to unknown works. I mean, in music history, for example, classical music, and of course you have to select capita selecta. But I recently was very much fascinated and then studied what we call the Galant era in Italy, between, say, the Durante and then the classical Viennese style, everything in between. And it's discoveries to be made of great music, or music that you start to recognize as great music as you learn more about it. all that is an enrichment. I find it an development of your musical taste papils. You just. But I'm getting too poetic, I'm afraid. So Isaac, you must stop.
There was a question from Julia Lorenz. Maybe she can also, but before that, let me just remind everyone that you can all just click on reactions and raise hand. So you don't have to write something if you want to speak. Just raise your hand, and we will give you the floor. You just will be opening your mic and speaking, saying something. Doesn't have to be a question. Whatever you want to bring to the discussion. Also, yeah, Julia Lorenz, about something specific, Peter, on your approach to a new piece of music, maybe, Julia?
Yes. I was wondering if you could just describe how you approach a new piece in a cultural informed manner, maybe opposed to the historical thing we learn at the universities.
No, again, it is not that I'm reacting against a good. I'm absolutely convinced that people who call themselves historically informed or who engage in that process do exactly the same attitude as I did. It is just to liberate, as Isaac pointed out, afraid of that term historically, that this may actually generate expectations. But for me, there is no basic difference. I can show you something that I use as a model for my students, actually, which is, I think, in to a large extent, an answer to your question. But that again is no great invention. You will recognize what others do as well. Let me just. This is an image that I use in my lessons. Because I try to convince my students that it is absolutely possible to be fairly completely informed about things, and I develop my idea to encourage them of the essential bookshelf. That's something, an essential virtual bookshelf of about 25 books, for example. I've never counted them, but just the idea and what that should contain. And then, of course, most of the information on which you should become slowly an expert during your life, because that's a plan for lifelong learning as well, is on your instrument or on your voice, on your very practice. Then around that, this is the circle where you share elements of your practice with the practice of others who play other instruments, who engage in other instruments. And you can already see that the amount of space there is to fill the central circle in is larger than the blue one. So the center is really on your instrument. Around that, you have music history and theory as an important, and I put them in the same circle because I think they are absolutely related. Around that even thinner circle is art history. I think it's fairly important to have a general knowledge on art history. And again, we don't need to be art historians for that. And then, of course, around that, general history. And so, just to develop my ideas, my idea would be that for general history, you have, for example, 2 or 3 books. I mean, whatever, Julia, you do in your free time is, of course, your own business. This is not what I mean. But in function of what you're doing, I think that you need to have these different layers that they can interact with each other. I recently did a project. I don't have any feedback from my students yet. That will still come, I suppose, I hope. But I did a project, a documentation project, because I have to organize in Brussels 5 of those 2-day documentation projects each year. And this year I chose the sea battle of Lepanto in 5071 as a point of departure. You can say, what? It's Lepanto? Well, it's a major sea naval battle between the Christian alliance and the Turkish fleet, the Ottoman fleet of that time. And it played an immense role. The victory of the Christians on that moment played an immense role on on the West, on the Christian world as a whole, and on Venice in particular. And I think that there are nuances of Giovanni Gabrieli's art, for example, that you understand better if you have that contents of that sort of victorious atmosphere that ruled Venice for the last decades of the 16th century, and that you can link all these elements together. So this is my idea, Julia. Now you decide whether your teachers do something different. I definitely hope that somebody who says, yes, but I am engaged with historical performance practice, does exactly the same thing. So it is not that it's going to change my attitude in that respect. Just apart from the fact that I find all these outer circles as relevant, perhaps not quantitatively, but qualitatively as important as these inner circles. And for me, for example, when I ask a student, why do you play that ornament in this place? And this student says, because Kwan says so, that's a very, very, very bad answer for me. I'm not interested. I mean, it's a good thing that you know what Kwan says. That's already a good starting point. But my question would be, why do you, with everything you know about this music and all the contact you have and all the hours you have played it, do you find that this is an appropriate thing to do on that moment? I ask your own artistic decision. And this can be fed in a much richer way, I think, if you engage in that sort of all-encompassing, which I, with words that Isaac righteously criticizes, would call culturally informed performance practice. Is that an answer to your question, Julia?
It is, yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Then could we have Jan-Andri Kwons speaking now? He was pointing to one of the topics that I think is in the background of this discussion, which is the separation, or how to overcome the separation between classical music and early music. Precisely, I think. Yeah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, my interest is in if this term cultural informed performance practice step into the direction of fusion of classical music scene and early music, so-called early music scene, because I think this separation is no longer needed, because the early music or historical informed practice goes more into the classical music scene as 30-40 years ago, and the term early music could be misleading in the perspective of our time. For example, I study Baroque cello, and I think this is also a very misleading term, because I don't also...
Uh-oh, you're frozen. Am I frozen or are you frozen?
He's frozen.
Jan-Andri is frozen. That's a pity, because I found it such an important remark. Jan-Andri, if you still hear me, can you try to log in again?
Well, he probably will be back in a few minutes or seconds.
Can we watch him when he comes back? Because
May I just say in this moment a little word on the early music platform we are going to have in Trossingen in October, because then we will have HIP in the center of a whole afternoon of discussion. So if you can join us then, who knows if we will be there in presence or online, we don't know yet because of Corona, but I just wanted to announce that as a chance to get further in that discussion about the meaning of HIP,
send us the link.
cultural informed performance.
Send us the link, Linde. Huh?
Yeah.
Jan-Andri
has it, Sarah has it.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Jan-Andri, you're back.
Yes.
I completely agree with you. I think I foresee a future that we can finally get rid of that term early music, and that we do not need to separate that. Having said this, we still will have to deal, just for the organization of a training at a conservatory, we will have to deal with the following problem. Let's just take an obvious example, the example that I took before of a modern, whatever that means, but a modern oboe player who at a specific point in his life or her life, decides, I would like to also master that older type of instrument as it was used in the time of Johann Sebastian Bach. This is not something you do in 2 weeks. Let alone somebody who says, I'm a trumpet player, but this music by Gabriele on these cornetti, that sounds so completely different. I would like to start cornetto. I mean, I'm mentioning these examples, Gianandri, because you know that for cello, the difference is not that big as for these instruments, for example. Well, we will still need in our structure of a conservatory a sort of reservoir where these people can be untouched for a few years, do their thing, because you need these few years to get around that. So, and how will you call that section of your conservatory where these people are? Are you calling that an early music department? For my part, you can keep calling that, you know. But the mentality that leads to that should already be present, I think, in the entire conservatory. And the problem that the early music world is now faced with, for me at this moment, is the fact that playing of early music of these older types of instruments is in most cases in an early music department, not the consequence of an artistic decision to step from that other basic type of instrument to that more specialized type of instrument, as you do, for example, but is a starting point for many players because they were just at a festival, they heard this beautiful instrument being played by this great player and they want to play that instrument. They have no notion about the reason why this type of instrument should be any better or any more accurate or any more whatever than the other type. They just start with that. And so the tool does not become a goal anymore, or a goal that, by the way, is not necessary, because I hear lots of modern orchestras who play Mozart fantastically without ever having touched any historical instrument. So it's an extra, it's a step that you do. I'm fascinated by it as well. So I share your fascination probably about that, but it's something that you decide once you see, yeah, but I mean, to play it in this position on my instrument or with this type of reed or with this type of fingering will make the music even more logic to what I discovered about this music. And as I said, for these exercises, we will still need a reservoir within a school construction where these people can do their thing for a couple of years. And so how are you going to call that then? And how are you going to forbid people who have never ever played another instrument but come to your school and said, I'm playing lute since my 7th and I would like to have a diploma lute playing here in your school? Are you going to say, no. You should have studied first guitar before you come to lute, because otherwise you do not know why you should play lute. So it creates very, very difficult situations, and we need to think about these things very earnestly. But I find it absurd that with all the information that is available out there, and that seems to now be associated only with these early musicians, making the other sort of suspect of all that information, better not to be informed too much on one hand. On the other hand, people who are bridging it do it sometimes fabulously, that you say, well, there is no bridge, there is absolutely no, you just inform yourself about things and then you try to achieve whatever you can. And whatever you can is sometimes even defined by your financial means. I mean, if you are unlucky enough to be a pianoforte player performing music from the beginning of the 19th century, I wish you luck, because for almost every 5 years you need a new piano, so to speak. Not to speak about lute players. Is that a little bit a reaction to your remark, Gianandri?
Yes, thank you very much.
We have Claire, who has her hand raised for a while.
Well, I wanted to add something, but Peter said it right now. I think that this reservoir of, let's say, early instrument students is very important, because I believe very, very much in what happens between students, and that the bridge will help everyone to look at the process in a cultural way. And even in small schools like ours, you know, the school, Peter, an early music department, let's call it like that, or early repertoire. But what is early repertoire? Maybe historical instruments department is very important. Well,
We all know, Claire, we both know how Schütz and Gabrieli sounds on saxophones, do we?
yeah, it's fantastic. And Monteverdi on two, Monteverdi Vespers on two soprano saxophones.
Saxophones. We did, for all the people who are wondering what we are referring to, Claire in Poitiers had this amazing project of doing general term Venetian late 16th century, German early 17th century music. So let's say Gabriele Schütz project with the entire school, not just the early music instruments, but also modern violin players, saxophones, modern trombones and trumpets, modern strings. And that was quite an adventurous project, but with what a result. I mean, just what
Yeah.
learn from it.
And we invited Peter to conduct the project. That's why we were talking about that.
It's an insider.
We had a nice contribution also from Ines, furthering in the relationship between the early music and the classical music, specialist, all of that. Maybe Ines, you can take the floor.
I apologize for not having my camera on. It's not that I'm hiding, it's just not working. I hope you can hear me though. It was just a comment.
Yeah, we can hear you, yes.
I think what Peter mentioned about this, it creates a different kind of dogma. As long as we stay the specialists who have exclusive access to this domain, we are simply passing on to our colleagues in the classical music, or classical departments, if we want to call it classical for lack of another word, or in a modern department, a different kind of dogma from the one we are supposedly running away from. We're going to tell them, you must play this trill from above or from below or from whatever. This is, let me just, I see that you want to interject, but this is, the reason I'm saying this is within our own The Hague Conservatory a week ago, a colleague from the modern department, main subject teacher in the modern department said, but then how the hell are we then supposed to play this trill? And the only thing I could say was, I want to discuss this with you. I don't want to tell you how to play this trill. So please join me in my exploration rather than asking me how to inform you on yet another dogma. I don't want a dogma.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And that's why it is as important for this colleague of yours to have studied the same tables of trills that we study in the early music department. I mean, because ultimately, it is your personal decision what you do with that information afterwards. I so much agree. And so I don't think that we should, the notion that we know better, or that we do better, sorry, perhaps we know better here and there. People who are historically documented know more than people who are not. That's an evidence.
Absolutely, but I think our goal should be for everyone to be better versed in reading for themselves and then come into an informed discussion as equals, rather than us imposing this superiority on our colleagues. And it's not that we want to, but in the construction of the conservatory, this often happens, that they come to us as kind of non-specialists and say, please tell me how to do it, which actually goes completely against what we're advertising for. It's precisely, I don't want to tell you how to do it.
Absolutely, and not just that, they come very often with the assumption that in our department everybody knows everything. And when I have that confrontation with modern classically trained students who come to my class, you feel that sort of basic respect. Now I'm stepping a foot into this early music world where everybody is so incredibly informed. I can tell you, for me it was a goal when I was a student, but I must say that I woke up in a world after a few years where even most of my gurus at that time had hardly read any treatise. because
Oh,
that's
absolutely. That's still the case.
That's absolutely, and that's one of the things that is also interesting to know, that part of the early music movement in the Western world was driven by insights based on studies of historical sources, but in many other cases it was just charisma of people who wanted to do something very different. And that was part of the movement that I encountered when I studied. So it is pretty. I'm always a bit ashamed when such a student comes with this a priori respect for early music because you people are so well informed. It is not true anymore. It is not true anymore. That, or it perhaps has never been. I don't know. Uh, Perhaps this is the reason. And there is no knowledge that can be useful that is not acceptable to anybody, whatever instrument you play. I've heard wonderful performances of Bach's music. For example, I mean, because it was here at home, there was a student who asked my wife, Chris Verhels, who is a harpsichord teacher and basso continuo teacher, who asked her for some advice on the performance of a Bach piece on accordion. And we thought, both thought in the beginning, my God, on accordion. I can assure you it was one of the loveliest performances I have ever heard. How she did it and how she took that information that she now got, how she sort of made that part of her artistic personality and made a very, in my eyes, a very convincing performance with it. And okay, we know Bach didn't know the accordion, as far as we know. That is until we find the source that there was a Bach accordion, of course.
We can give the word now to Emily. She has her hand raised also for a while.
Hi, thanks so much for this very interesting discussion. I wanted to comment on a couple of interlinked things. One is the theme that I feel like is coming through in a lot of the discussion, which is this distinction between the way that historical performance or early music is perceived from the outside still, which I think is very coloured by those exhausting, rather pointless debates in the 80s and 90s about, by Peter Keevy and all these people about the idea that historical performance is somehow oriented towards a goal of proving a right or wrong way of playing things, versus what I hope that most of us involved in doing it are actually interested in, which is the journey, right? It's about the journey of exploration rather than the ultimate destination. And I think it's possible to exhaust ourselves still trying to argue against these very kind of abstract.
That's what I meant with my how did I call it? Not a goal-oriented, but a process-oriented approach.
Exactly, yeah. And my apologies, I came in a little late, so I missed
okay.
part of the session. But I'm interested in how that is reflected in the way that people are discussing the way that a lot of conservatoires are very siloed in having an early music department and a classical music department, which from my experience in conservatoires in mainland Europe are very separate from each other. And similarly, also the way that conservatoires are very separated from universities where musicology is studied.
Yeah, okay.
And just as a perspective from the UK, where it works quite differently, and we have many problems over here on a very broad scale. But my own upbringing in early music was in a university, and in universities in the UK, performance and musicology are taught side by side in a very intermingled way. And so this notion of culturally informed performance is a very natural thing that works in, because of course you're studying musicology from the perspective which is already very culturally aware, because musicology has moved on a very long way since the positivist approach, no? And then of course a lot of our early musicians in the UK tend to come out of the university system rather than the conservatoire system. So there are problems with that, in that it has a tendency to de-emphasize specialization, which in some quarters can lead to, although you end up with musicians who then work very successfully across both sides of the divide, you also can end up with attitudes that almost decry being specialized in an early instrument too much, or particularly in the case of wind instruments, adapting your instrument to fit your physical expectations of the modern player rather more than you would if you specialized in depth as the way you do tend to in mainland Europe. But it's just, I think it's worth thinking, if we're thinking about how we teach early music it's really worth considering the very profound effect that this siloing of different areas of education has on this debate, because it's really profound, actually.
I so much agree with you, and sorry for not making this distinction. The Anglo-Saxon world, to whom, not with England, but more with the United States, I'm pretty acquainted with, is indeed completely different. Just to give only one example, some of our basic specialized books, for example, can hardly be found in our conservative libraries all over this region, whereas in even the most mediocre university in the United States, you can find that very book. The problem is with the siloing that you mentioned is that we will continue to need those specific. For example, what do we do with the pitch problem? Only that. If you want to organize a chamber music between people, and which is a very important. Chamber music, all kinds of playing together. It is logic that you make a compartment with people who have something comparable in pitch, even if that in itself is not very historical, but that's another thing. So yes, we will have to think about that and how we will preserve these reserves for specific activities and still have an all-over mentality that we all share. And in that sense, I would like to go to who was it who made the recording? It's just that I forgot your name, Michael Meltzer. That the main goal is making music, and this is something that we all share, and as long as we don't make these oppositions, but I think it's going to disappear. I also don't think that the early music movement should now have the pretension that we can teach all the other poor musicians how things can be done. And this is what Ines actually warned a little bit for, because I don't think that we are any better than anybody else. I think that, however, what I called culturally informed performance, whatever you call it, and let's please invent a word that is neutral, that would be fantastic, that we should confront all musicians who play old music, because or who play not Hikan Nunk music, that would be fantastic. And that we can even share with people from the pop department.
There was this proposal in the summit, there was one person who said, why don't we call it music? And that's it.
That's fantastic indeed, yeah.
Okay, this is a little bit of a joke. I think it is good maybe now to start closing. We have gone already a couple of minutes beyond the time that we have assigned for this. If there are people that still want to make their voice heard, we still can do this. We can go a little bit beyond time. And in any case, I would like very much to thank you, the organization, the AEC, for sure, Sarah, and the whole team of the task force for early music, and especially now, of course, to Peter, who was very keen to and very kind to accept this kind of third degree that I did at the beginning of the session. Yeah, that was very nice. That was very nice from you. So if we have someone who wants to participate still, or some thought that we want to get across, and otherwise I will just leave Peter for a closing remark if you want.
I really don't have anything new to say, so if there is an important remark that somebody wants to make, I'll gladly leave that to that person. But if not, I really hope that we can continue this sort of conversations and experiences, because I think that we are on a moment now, also with this Corona situation, but also with the global political situation, that we musicians can play a very important role. And the more we are convinced that we about what we are sharing and not about what is dividing between us, the more success we will have, I think, in influencing the world. My God, I never thought I would end with such a
Claire, you go now. Claire, try to get over that.
Yes, I'm just, I want to thank you both, Peter and Isaac, for this first Quodlibet. And, welcome everyone to the second and the third Quodlibet. I think it's indeed, we experienced it today for the first time, and it's a good way to stay together and open the floor to everyone, students, teachers, artists. So welcome back next time, next month. No, it's in May.
It's in May. It's on my birthday.
Uh-huh. So
Precisely.
come with Bart Kuiken in May.
Yeah, maybe if Sarah wants to say the exact dates and the names, you have that around?
Yes, so it will be on Friday, 7th of May with Bartol Kuiken. And the following one would be Friday, 4th of June with Paul Agneau. It's always at 5 o'clock until 6:30.
Okay.
So thank you very much for being here. And I think we can just close it with till the next Quodlibet.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. And hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.